Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Open Data Policy Best Practices. Our host for today's webinar is Ian Kalin, Socrata's Director of Open Data, and he is joined by our panelists. We have Councilman Riemer from Montgomery County, Maryland, Senator Bill Ferguson from the state of Maryland, and Alisha Green, a policy associate with the Sunlight Foundation. We encourage your questions throughout today's webinar. The Q&A feature is located in the GoToWebinar control panel on the left side of your screen. Thank you everybody for joining us today, and let's get started.
Hello everyone, this is Ian Kalin. Alita, thank you so much for that introduction. As Alita said, I am the Director of Open Data for Socrata, and I am honored to moderate a discussion today with some of the nation's best practitioners and minds behind open data, and in particular how policy can help. We have a packed agenda. Look at all these items. We're going to cover a number of different topics at different levels about open data policy, but really it's going to drill into the functions of government and how really open data is being used to help deliver better government services. We will have presentations from each of these experts, and you can see the agenda here. We're going to touch on a number of topics. First, that we'll say a high level and then drill down into some specifics. We have experts from across the board. Alisha Green from the Sunlight Foundation will present, we'll say, the primer and some national perspectives as to open data policy from many different, we'll say, geographies. And then we're going to do a deep dive into two parts of Maryland, the state level with State Senator Bill Ferguson, and something more local with Councilman Riemer. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Alisha Green in just a second. For those of you who are signed into this webinar and care about open data policy, you've probably already used or heard about some of the work coming out of the Sunlight Foundation. Alisha is one of the nation's leaders in terms of guiding folks on how to implement such things and improve their data operations. But before directly turning it over to Alisha to present, I'll just take a moment to just give some context. You know, we're very proud to be supporting over 100 governments, 150 governments throughout the world on their open data programs. Not all of them have a policy associated with it, at least not really. The open data policies, of course, tend to be more regulatory, even legal in fashion. And open data, for many of the practitioners, may be more technology focused. And so this is really interesting and fascinating relationship between the programs and policies and laws and executive orders and directives that frame open data and customer service, and then the practice of actually making this stuff work. And so I really am eager to learn from the folks that are on the webinar here to see what they're doing, and to, of course, open it to discussion not just between our experts, but from all of you that are participating in this webinar. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Alisha Green, policy analyst with, policy associate with the local policy team at Sunlight. Alisha, I'd love to turn it over to you now and see what you could present with us.
Okay, great. Well, let me get started, and thank you so much for having me, first of all. I'm a policy associate with the local policy team here at Sunlight Foundation, and I am happy to talk to all of you today. So Sunlight Foundation is a nonpartisan nonprofit based here in Washington, D.C. And our name comes actually from the quote by former Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who said, "Sunlight is the best of disinfectants, electric light the most efficient policeman." We have really taken that to heart with our work. We combine technology and advocacy to help open up governments at all levels. As part of the local policy team, though, what I do primarily is work with states and municipalities across the country on open data policies and making those more efficient. So I actually want to start with a study done in 2009 by Pew, which found that more than 40% of people were going online to access some kind of government information. This is why we believe that in the modern era, governments should be putting information online where people can access it. So I don't want to assume that we all have the same definition of open data. I want to start with Sunlight's definition of what this is. Open data is about the right to public information online in a way that's easily accessible because it is non-proprietary and it's structured. So I'll talk a little bit more about what all of this means, but essentially what we're talking about is information that you don't have to ask for because it's already online. It's easy for a computer to parse through and read, and you can reuse it. I know this is a very open data savvy crowd, but I don't want to assume we all have the same definition of the benefits of open data either. So I want to talk a little bit about those. I think it's really important to embrace the full range of benefits that open data can have for government and the public. So open data can help create transparency and empower accountability by giving people more access to information about government processes and allowing them to ask questions about how government is working for them. It can enhance efficiency and improve service quality for governments themselves. We've often found that government staff are some of the key users of open data and open data portals. They, often face technical or bureaucratic challenges to accessing information from other agencies and departments. So being able to break information out of those silos through open data programs really helps people within government too. We found open data can help attract commerce by sparking new ideas among business people and entrepreneurs. Maybe they can mash it up with existing data that they have or make it more useful in some way. Certainly we've seen a lot of apps springing up using open data from different governments. And of course, open data can also help increase public participation. As people become more informed about what government is doing, they're better able to see how they can fit into those processes, how they can contribute their ideas. People are better informed and feel more likely to be engaged. So to help support open data policies across the country in places of all sizes, Sublight crafted the Open Data Policy Guidelines. These guidelines outline more than 30 individual best practices that we believe are key for strong open data policies and implementation. Now, the 3 buckets of the policy guidelines include what data should be public, how to make data public, and how to implement policy. I just want to take you through a few best practices from each of those categories. So in the first bucket, looking at what data should be public, the best practices include proactively releasing information online, a key concept of open data, as I explained, and building on precedent to do that. Most places have pretty good public records laws already that outline what kinds of information people should be able to access. So by building on a public records law, you can really make sure that you're releasing information that's already clearly public and giving people better access to it. We also think all government information should be addressed, so that means including quasi-governmental agencies and related organizations. Just because they're not fully governmental doesn't mean that information isn't still incredibly useful to people. We also suggest creating a data inventory to help prioritize release of data sets. We understand all of the data sets can't be put online all at once, so it's good to know what you have in the first place and work from there. And all of this has to be done, of course, while appropriately safeguarding sensitive information. There is some information government holds that cannot be proactively released to people. Second bucket of the Open Data Policy Guidelines looks at how to make data public. So looking at open and varied formats, really using open data formats that mean people don't have to buy proprietary software to access the information. They can access it easily on any computer. Going along with that, bulk download is really key to making sure people can access all the information at once rather than having to download file by file for different data sets. Creating a central location for data makes it a lot easier for the public to find this information in the first place. If it's spread out across a couple of different data portals, people might not know where to look, and they might think information just isn't available online. Open data, of course, is also about removing barriers to access and reuse. So people need to be able to access this information, but also freely reuse it. That's how people start innovating around it. They, create applications or do community engagement with information that's available. And all of this can really be empowered by mandating electronic filing of common forms. If information is digital from the get-go, it's a lot easier to be putting it out online. Third category of the Open Data Policy Guidelines looks at how to implement policy. So now you have a policy in place, but how do you move forward? Well, establishing clear guidance and oversight for moving that policy forward is going to be key. If you have someone who can really lead the policy and make sure that there's buy-in from all the departments, it's going to be incredibly useful to helping everyone see how they contribute. Setting clear timelines is also useful. A policy is ultimately not very effective if there aren't timelines for people to be meeting. So we found that to be really useful in policies that we've looked at. Mandating future review, of course, can help iterate on a policy. No policy is going to be perfect the first time around. So it's helpful to make sure that you're revisiting that initial policy that you had in place. And of course, throughout this whole process, a best practice is absolutely to include public perspectives. Make sure that you're talking to people about what kinds of information they can use, what kinds of information they would find most useful for having access to as open data. And that can really help with your prioritization process. So these guidelines are not just ambitious. Actually, there are nearly 50 open data policies at the state and municipal level across the country. And many of these policies are informed by the guidelines. We read through each of those policies and used them to create an open data policy examples resource as well. So we looked at what language was working in those policies, what we thought was really highlighting best practices, and we pulled out those language examples from existing policy and pointed to narrative examples as well. So anyone who wants to start crafting their own open data policy could go to this page and learn a little bit more about what other people have been doing. Just to leave you with a few takeaways, lessons learned from going through all these policies and thinking about best practices here at Sunlight. Customizing for the community is really key to making sure that the policy is building on what information the government has and what people are demanding access to. And also ensuring that, in case there isn't a strong public records law, for example, you're really crafting an open data policy that outlines what information should be public. Planning for the long term is key too. A policy that just sets up an open data portal isn't going to be incredibly sustainable or necessarily have the momentum needed to achieve the full benefits. So, of course, setting up a portal is wonderful and having it in one central location is key, but it needs to go beyond that, making sure that data sets are being examined and prioritized for release. So creating actionable guidance can help with all of that. And, again, including the public and all the processes is incredibly useful. And mandating that review to make sure that the policy keeps getting iterated upon and can be built upon and refined as the process moves forward. And with that, I welcome any questions that anyone might have, and I would be happy to kick it back over.
Alisha, thank you so much. As a reminder for all the participants on this webinar, please feel free to fire your questions through the GoToWebinar chat feature, and I will be sure to moderate those questions and bring them into our panelists as we proceed. One question to start, Alisha. So you definitely shared some of the lessons learned. I presume that came from, we'll say, failures, shortcomings from individual governments, and not to shame them with specific names, but maybe I can ask you on the positive side, what are some of your favorite examples of governments that have effectively used some of the Sunlight Foundation's guidelines to deploy really great policies, recognizing, of course, that you're about to be followed by two brilliant innovators from Maryland?
Well, I mean, this is actually a great scenario for me. Oh, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, yeah.
Okay, great. This is a great scenario for me because we do often point to Montgomery County as a leader with open data policy best practices. Certainly as far as including the public and prioritizing data release, Montgomery County has been a leader that we've pointed to again and again. When it comes to some of the other best practices, Louisville was one of the first places to set the default to open with their open data policy and really build upon existing public records laws. And we've seen all kinds of different policies around the country innovating in different ways.
Excellent. Well, okay, so you did it. You did the great introduction to Montgomery County. Who's coming next? I guess I have some other favorites and some other governments that maybe are very open about their own lessons learned. But that's probably as good an intro as we're going to get. Next up, we have the very representative that Alisha was just talking about, Councilmember Hans Riemer. I would love to turn it over to you to talk a bit about your perspective as a legislator for open data.
Very good. Thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I'm really excited about this discussion. And I joined the County Council about 4 years ago, and my background in politics and technology really led me to want to strengthen the connection between technology and social change at the local government level. So I started to look around at what was happening and was seeing so many exciting developments with people building apps and holding hackathons, talking about big data and analytics. And as I tried to sort through it all and figure out how to proceed, I gradually realized that almost anything you wanted to do depended on having a foundation of good data. And so the way to get started for the long term, as Alisha commented about building for the long term, the way to get started was to build a foundation of data management, data practices, and open data, which would then enable us to get into all kinds of new opportunities. So I had some personal experience with bad planning for data in Montgomery County, which is kind of like the outfield of the diamond, where DC is the diamond in the Washington region. We have overlapping jurisdiction for bus service, and each bus service in the county, the metro system in the county, has a different app for real-time transit information. And one of them broke, and they were using different standards, and it led me to understand that planning for data standards and interoperability and these kinds of things are really, really important. So now is the time, if you're kind of thinking about the front end of this, to build a foundation that's going to last you for decades, and that will revolutionize how your government collects data, manages it, and then shares it. Good data, I won't go too much into what this means because there's people who are better at this than I, but it's accurate, it's standardized, it's relevant, it's accessible, and it's challenging. It's hard for a government to build the business processes that are necessary to produce good data. And so that's where you come in with creating a policy. The law that I drafted was called the Open Data Act, and became law in 2012. My favorite model for it was the New York City Open Data Policy. And early on in discussions about it, I had a choice about how I was going to deal with the executive branch. Was I going to try to pass a law over, their various particular objections, or was I going to sit down with them and figure out a collaborative approach? And I decided to take the collaborative approach, and I just want to say how important it's been to the subsequent success of the whole initiative, because everyone's on board, and collaboration is really a key principle of the open data movement anyway. The key provisions of the law is that it requires a county executive to catalog all the county's data sets and prioritize and publish them over time. The key point for the executive branch, though, was getting some flexibility to design the program and to meet a realistic time frame for what was truly intended to be a comprehensive effort. And so we allowed them to put the details into an implementation plan, and then to come back with us to the council and resubmit the implementation plan. So we did do that, and that has, you'll see the results of that soon. Also, as a side note, the law also included a provision that requires the county to record the request, the status, and the publication of any public information requests, like FOIA-type requests. And that's because we view that information as being inherently publicly valuable, and we want that to be out on the internet. So we are now the first government in the country to have a requirement that all FOIA-type requests will be recorded and published, and you can see that, some more information about that in a write-up about it at the Sunlight Foundation. So our implementation plan, currently we have about 39 data sets up, and there's going to be another 56 added before the end of this fiscal year, which is the end of June. We have come up with a prospective list of 553 data sets with a multi-year publishing plan, and there's a requirement that every department must publish at least one. There are definitely challenging privacy issues. Certain information has to be redacted in many cases, so we've allowed those ones to be sort of deferred towards later in the process. The prioritization for publishing data has been, there's a public process where we try to determine value. Anything can be a data set to some extent, so you want to do things that are going to be valuable to your residents, and you want to get their input on that. So we have got a prioritization process that helps us determine that, and fundamentally our plan for publication is living and breathing. It can adapt and it can change. Just going to refer you to some information that Socrata has put out about top data sets. They have one version for counties, one version for cities. Food inspection data is very popular. A lot of people use that to keep tabs on the restaurants that they like. Permits, very popular. County employee salaries, very, not surprisingly popular, particularly with the county employees. I think that budget and spending data sets are the most innovative that we've developed so far, and I'm going to show you that. Historically, I imagine our government's not unlike the rest of them around the country. We have relied on producing paper budget books. It's a monstrous undertaking, requires dozens of people, endless hours. And the budget team here, I had made a request that they look at sort of an open checkbook policy or approach, and they developed something much bigger and much better. And they realized that they had budget data in electronic format, and using the principles of open data, that they could do something special. And they actually sat down with Socrata, and we have piloted a new open budget tool and visualization tool that we think is pretty darn exciting. So I'm going to show you a little bit about that. Again, this is all based in the principles of open data, and I got to say, I'd like to claim credit here, but I didn't have much to do with this at all other than creating the policy. But it goes to show what can happen when you create a collaborative approach with your executive branch and you have smart people inside your government. So I'm going to click on the link now to take you directly to our website. I'm hoping that everyone can see this, and if not, someone will send me an alert.
No, it looks great.
Okay, terrific. So this is, again, this is a pilot with Socrata, so this tool is available as part of Socrata's offerings. I'm not promoting that necessarily, but I'm just letting you know. Here is a map showing the capital projects that are in our budget, and I'm just going to zoom in right now. The larger the circle, the bigger the project. And if you're a resident, you want to know what the county government's building in your area, well, you can come here and you can click on, you know, a wide variety of things and figure out where they are. Not only that, you can see where they are in process. Are they in planning? Are they in design? Are they in final design? Have bids been put out? Is it under construction? Very useful information. That's the capital budget, and these items here, you know, divide the capital budget according to project. On the operating budget side, you have all kinds of, you know, every department has its category. We're going to click into the Department of Transportation, and I'm going to show the tree maintenance budget, something that our Department of Transportation handles. And this is interesting because it shows you, here's what the executive proposed. It was a $4.43 million budget for tree maintenance. Here's what the county council approved. We added about $400,000 to tree maintenance. So this is just 1 year's budget document, and I hope you can imagine what it'll be like after, you know, 10 years, where you can really begin to crunch numbers over time and really get into spending. So that is one of our big initiatives. A second initiative we're working on is called Spending Montgomery. Again, this is about demonstrating the value of open data. So Spending Montgomery will allow residents to drill down to very minute levels of detail about how dollars are being spent inside the government. We have Contracts Montgomery that's going to provide a great visibility into our procurement process. We are working on something I didn't quite name it properly, Open County Stat, but we have a performance division called County Stat. It's modeled after City Stat, State Stat, and we are now working to build to adopt a public-facing open data tool that shows how the county is performing at its set goals, so that people can understand, you know, to what extent we're meeting our objectives. I'm working on something related to legislative open data. I'm very interested in modeling what a legislative branch should do. Don't want to get showed up by our executive branch. And what I'm sort of hitting on is the idea of search and notify. That, you know, you hear from a lot of residents that, well, why didn't they know that this was happening at the county council? So if I can figure out how to use the open data sets to create a search and notify function, then people can come and they can sign up for a notification anytime an action on a zoning amendment in their neighborhood is before the county council in any format. There's also a tool called the Madison Project that I haven't yet used, but I plan to, that kind of adds a layer of public online public comments and online public hearings to the legislative process. So in summary, this is about revolutionizing how your county collects data, manages it, shares it with a collaborative approach to open data based on a comprehensive policy. And I think if you pursue these goals, you'll help make your government organization and your services smarter and leaner and more efficient. And in general, you will be awesome. here's my contact information, and I look forward to connecting with anybody offline. Please, connect with me on Facebook, or let's get connected on Twitter or by email. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Councilman Riemer, we're going to get a chance to bring in questions from our participants, but I want to take advantage of this opportunity to fire one off right away before we move on to the last introductory presentation. You were definitely, this is awesome. No debate, and impressive on so many levels, a real beacon for the nation. I'd like to ask a detailed question about your lessons learned from the legislative perspective and more the micro level. I think it's fair to assume that a number of folks who are joining this webinar are legislators themselves, policymakers.
Yeah.
And like all good legislators, all good engineers, where sometimes the devil's in the details. And what were some of those details that maybe tripped up your initial legislation, or maybe on your wish list of things you would have liked to have done? I think you said back in 2012. A lot of this at a high level is very hard to debate. Democrat, Republican, state house, county house, people are generally supportive on all levels for being more accountable and transparent with citizens, but it's the details that get people tripped up. So what were some of your experiences there at kind of the line item level that you think may be relevant to other folks that are listening in today?
Well, you have to really think through how you're going to present this. When I first started talking about pursuing an open government strategy here, the first reaction I got from one of my colleagues who was on the committee and whose support I really ultimately needed was that this is going to lead to cyberbullying. Because at that time she was getting a hard time from some people on her Facebook page, and she drew a real direct line between open data and people harassing other people in the comment section of the Washington Post or Facebook. Of course, there was no connection whatsoever, but the immediate reaction of people who are public officials sometimes can be one of concern about vulnerability. The other issue is about what is the public right to know, and whether this is modifying what is essentially the public access to records. And it's important, at least in our case, we don't change the public access to records. That law is our Maryland Public Information Act, and any person can get any information that they request at any time from the county government or the state government, and this doesn't change that. So we are not actually modifying the basic right to access records. What we're trying to do is take the data and the information that we have, publish it actively, and then create value from that through private sector building applications, through research and other kinds of implementation. So those were two issues that always kind of were stumbling blocks. Was, does this lead to people harassing me on the internet because I don't want that, or does this modify public right to know statutes?
Yeah, excellent, interesting. Well, thank you for that, and we're going to move ahead to the next portion of our agenda before we open it up to more of our group discussion and questions from our participants. Up next is Maryland State Senator Bill Ferguson, former teacher of Baltimore City, a lawyer, and currently the state senator that has authored the current open data policy bill for Maryland. Senator, we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Ian, and thanks to Hans and Alisha for kicking this off. And it's interesting. It's good to follow Hans because in real life in Maryland, I would say that our local governments are way ahead of our state government, and I think that's a pretty fair national trend. And by the very nature of local governments being a bit more nimble and able to implement a bit faster than state governments, we're really seeing some amazing work come out of Montgomery and Baltimore City, particularly around budgeting open data. Montgomery really is a national leader, and it's great that we are able to learn from them. So let me jump in. I think it is always critically important to talk about open data from the perspective of why. There's a lot of places where things can get hung up, and if you continually go back to the why, that's what will really drive the conversation forward. So in Maryland, we, just like most other states, the standard transparency has been built around the Public Information Act and open meetings, and those have sort of been the pillars of transparency in government. I would argue that open data is sort of the third leg of the stool that is coming, that actually, as open data becomes a more powerful force, the other two around open meetings and public information become less important, because if you're having things open by default, there's less of a burden on the citizen to challenge what's accessible. If it's out there, it's out there. If it's not, there's a reason that it's not. So the transparency argument is important. I think it's changing the nature, open data is changing what transparency means, but I ultimately don't think that just the argument of transparency is a winning argument. What I think are stronger arguments are these other three: the effectiveness of government, the efficiency of government, and the power for the potential for economic development. You know, with state stat and various kind of metrics to improve the public sector, open data is kind of the bedrock that makes that possible. So the stronger data that is available and that is public, the more likely it is that we will see pressure placed on public entities to really perform up to what to their highest potential. You know, the other piece of this is crowdsourcing difficult problems. Governments deal with hard, difficult things, and by having data publicly available, there's many more eyeballs looking at very difficult issues that the more perspectives, the better. Last but not least, I think the economic development argument is critical. Think about things like GPS or residential data, home sales that have created companies like Zillow, and any app that's ever been based on GPS. All of these used to be closed data sets. Now they're open, and they've created billions of dollars of private investment. And I think that is a very strong case to make. So how did we get here in Maryland? This is sort of the very quick and dirty staged process. I'm going to run through this quickly, but we can go through more in questions. In 2011, when I was first elected, I did what legislators like to do, formed a committee to study the issue. So we passed the Joint Committee on Transparency and Open Government. That committee looked at a lot of issues related to government transparency at the state level, namely PIA and open meetings. And we had bits and pieces of conversations around open data, but to be perfectly frank, we really struggled. It was very hard without an open data policy in place to dive into these long-fought battles around PIA appeals and the cost charge. And my sense was we had to take a new direction. So similar to Montgomery, and it's good to hear that, we decided to approach the governor and see what his level of buy-in was, Governor OMalley, around creating an open data policy. Open data has been something that the governor and his administration have really made prime drivers. The difference is that it's only had been done through executive order. And with a looming change in administration, be it from either party, we thought that it was very important that we take some of the strong benefits that had accumulated for Maryland under a more open state data policy, put them into law, and find out ways to further implement them. So we had a number of collaborative work groups, which led to the creation of an Open Data Act. Just like the PIA and open meetings were at some point passed, this, I believe, is stage one of a very long process. So it certainly isn't perfect, but I'm proud of where we started. I think we are headed in the right direction. The act sets forth both a policy, a set of definitions, and then creates an open data council. So the real work is happening through our Open Data Council, which I'll jump to in just a second. But this is just a quick, if anybody needs a reference to the law, here is how we defined open data and the state policy. If you take a second to read it, I will grant you that it's pretty vague. And this was a challenge to reach consensus around what exactly does it mean to have a policy for open data. Through the bill, there are more specific definitions, limitations, kind of caveats. I'm not going to jump into those because they're in the bill. I will just say that we just needed to get something on the books that said we are going to continue with what we've done over the last 8 years under the OMalley administration, and it is the state's policy to enhance it. So the way that we were going to do that is through this statutorily created Open Data Council. It is a 47-member body. Everybody sort of looks at that and says, how do you possibly operate? I believe, just like the councilman noted, the power of open data comes through collaboration. And so to do this well, we needed every potential stakeholder group have a stake in where the policy development was moving forward. So we have each of the different departments. Their secretary has an appointment. We have 5 seats for local governments and 5 seats for the private sector. It's a very broad stakeholder group. It is chaired by our Department of Information Technology and vice chaired by StateStat. The interesting thing here is that StateStat in Maryland was only created through an executive order. It wasn't a legislatively created branch of government. And so part of this policy in getting this bill passed was to codify the existence of StateStat so that it would continue past subsequent administrations. So by making them the vice chair, there is a legal requirement that some form of StateStat still exists no matter who the governor is. With 47 members, obviously work groups are critical. So the real council will only meet probably 2 to 3 times a year, but the work groups will be ongoing continuously, and that's where the real action is happening. So what do? We have a number of functions. They're typical to what you would expect, really around policy, legislative guidance. There's coordination amongst the various agencies. We're trying to look at best practices. In fact, we just had Montgomery County come present to the council about a month ago to talk about how they moved forward. And it was, it's sort of taking where it's working well and seeing if we can do it at a state level. And then the last, and I would say a really important piece that gets kind of under discussed, is that we will be advising on procurement. A number of problems that we found so far is that each state department was procuring its own separate data system. And so there was no real standardization around regularly produced machine-readable data. The council will be putting forth, hopefully, regulations to state procurement and our budget office that will ensure that any new technology that's purchased in the state will have the ability to report or display data in a way that can be put into an open data portal. The other piece is around records management. We have a state archives. That is something that has been, we have lots of buildings that hold lots of old records. I think there's an important question here with open data that all of our records, for the most part, are digital, and we have to have strong policies for how we have those for 50 years down the line. We have a number of open data portals in place. Again, the O'Malley Brown administration really pushed the use of data for decision making. I can pull some of these up in the questions if there are any specific questions, but I've got the links at the bottom. We have 2 separate main entry points for our open data. The first is the Maryland Open Data Portal, data.maryland.gov. This is your typical Socrata dashboard with a number of state data sets that have really been much more voluntarily offered up over the last few years. Our goal will be to make it much more systemic and predictable as to what data sets are included on a more regular basis. Here is the example of Governor O'Malley's strategic priorities. He has a list of 16 goals that are tracked, measured, and reported on. So he's gotten a lot of, from political insiders, there are a lot who are very hesitant about stating a very clear goal because you may not meet it. And the O'Malley Brown administration's approach has been a lot different, and they say this is where we want to be, and we want our citizens to hold us accountable. So all of the data in the dashboard feeds into these strategic goals. We also have a mapping program through IMAP. This is also through another part of the Socrata platform. And this is one example of a number of the mapping tools that we have. We have BayStat, CrimeStat, which all take state-level data, in some cases aggregated up from the locals and put it in a graphical map-based representation. There's some pretty neat dashboards that we've been able to create, and the goal will be to enhance these further. So what have I learned over the last 4 years? I tried to really think hard because I think this is probably the most important part of the conversation for folks on this call today. The first is that I think the strongest way to make the case for open data is the economic case. We have to sort of restore our ability to believe that government is the foundation for helping private businesses thrive. This is done through open data. The touchy-feely transparency is critically important to democracy, but I think it becomes a hard sell in the political environment. Culture is key. I can't emphasize enough how much getting buy-in on the front end is critically important. You really have to make sure that the folks that are doing the work see the value in why it is happening. Similarly, coordination and collaboration drive the day. We could have passed a bill that pushed everything forward, but if we didn't have buy-in from the executive branch, I don't think we would be where we are today, which I believe is in a pretty good spot. This can get really complicated and really tricky really quickly. And so I continually tell folks who are working on these policies, stay out of the weeds until you're really implementing, because the weeds are where open data goes to die. The weeds are important in implementation, but when you're looking at policy development, it's important to pivot out of the details and focus on the why. Getting that buy-in around culture and collaboration is the approach that we took. We will be coming back with some accountability and implementation plan type of legislation down the line, but we needed a policy first. Don't underestimate the power of definitions and how they can affect the work moving forward. Plan ahead and expect pushback, particularly around privacy. We are hopefully going to work with our new Attorney General to help make this path a bit smoother, but privacy is an important pillar that we have to respect, but it also can't be a roadblock to open data. Last but not least, all of this, in my mind, is restoring people's faith in democracy. Open data is the link that will help people to start trusting democracy and government again, because government is doing good things and we just have to show it. With that, I will pass it along for Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you so much for that presentation. We have our first question in from our participants here, and rather than just direct this straight to Senator Ferguson, I'm going to open it to all the panelists. When developing open data legislation, inevitably it will lead to change, and change of some type usually has, as the Senator just mentioned, a culture shift, maybe an organizational shift. Some actions are going to be taken differently, and as tends to happen with government, there may be a budgetary impact on that. What was money for an Open Information, Freedom of Information Act may go now towards open data or vice versa. And so, I'm sorry, I'm seeing other text as I'm speaking here. I'm going to ask the question, then I'll pass on to the panelists. The question is really, does funding, financial allocation, need to be part of the legislation in order for it to be successful? So again, if the legislation creates change and there's impacts on funding, does the funding actually need to be written into the law itself? And so I'll open that up to all of the panelists, whoever would like to speak first. Does anyone? I don't know if there's a kind of a webinar feature. Oh, there we go. Everyone can talk. Okay, Alisha, would you like to chime in first?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So that's a great question, and it's certainly one that we get asked a lot as we're working with places on their policies. But there are very few policies that actually have funding directly attached to them or written into legislation. You know, it tends to be something that's more on the implementation side. And actually, that's good in some ways because it allows for some flexibility. You know, certainly we think there needs to be sufficient funding for a very robust open data program, but ultimately, existing resources can absolutely be leveraged, and open data can be done on a budget too. You know, leveraging people who already work with the data sets across departments can be incredibly useful, and working with the community to understand what they want through existing, you know, town hall outreach. All these things can kind of be combined to do open data on a budget, as we like to call it.
Excellent. And Councilmember Riemer, would you like to respond?
Yes. When I first introduced the legislation, and before I had a understanding with the executive branch about what it was that we were doing, the fiscal note that came back about the bill was huge, millions and millions of dollars. And once we sat down and kind of got on the same page about what it meant, suddenly it was a manageable expenditure. So I don't know that you need to, you know, it depends on how your legislative process works. Ours works, you just pass the law and then you get a fiscal impact that you have to, you know, address as part of your, you know, everyone has to be comfortable with the amount of money that it costs to do what it is that the law requires to do. But, you know, a lot of the time is the personnel involved in executing the policy and changing the business processes. And it doesn't necessarily require the acquisition of technology necessarily, but it is a person-intensive effort. But at the same time, existing parts of the organization can implement this without necessarily having to add significant new positions. So it's important to be in very close dialogue with the the implementation branch so that you have an accurate understanding of what you're getting into.
Excellent, excellent. I have another question coming in. I guess I'll direct this to Senator Ferguson. Legislation feels like the 800-pound gorilla of policy. You also had mentioned that Governor Martin O'Malley had an executive order. What's the comparative value of legislation versus executive orders?
That's a very good question and incredibly relevant in Maryland today. Executive orders are excellent because it shows executive buy-in, and at the end of the day, the executive branch is the one that will be implementing the vast majority of the open data policy work. However, governors come and go. The law is permanent until changed, and so we have the Governor O'Malley is outgoing. We were able to codify through the council the executive orders, ensure that state stats still exist, and maintain this emphasis on open data that will transition into a governor that will be incoming from a different party. I believe that open data is a bipartisan issue that crosses party lines because it's about doing government well. And so now it is in law, whereas if it had not been in law, a new administration could have come in and essentially wiped the slate clean by rescinding any executive orders in place.
Excellent. And for the other panelists, would anyone like to chime in on that question as well?
I would just add that, an executive order may not be comprehensive. An executive order, we've seen instances around the country, might direct their departments to release some number of data sets. But what we wanted to do was profoundly change how the whole county and every department collects data, manages it, and shares it. And so we didn't think it was likely that an executive order would get to that level. So what we've hit on was this combination of a broad policy that is legislative, but then the details being regulatory, so that the executive branch has the flexibility to make decisions and figure out how to move it forward. It's kind of a harmonization of both sides.
Excellent, excellent. And let's see. I'm getting more. Here we go. So I'm getting text galore. Here we have a brief audience poll. Also be a primer and encourage folks to please continue asking questions. So everyone who's participating should be able to select one of these. If you would like to have additional assistance drafting your own open data policy, a simple yes, no would suffice. And actually, lo and behold, organizers and panelists, please don't vote. We'll keep this more authentic. It'll provide just a brief voting moment for folks who are participating to provide an answer. And with that, since it was a quick question, it shouldn't take very long, I'm going to go to the next question here from folks that are participating. I'm actually getting a couple here simultaneously. I'll just choose the first one that came in. How important is public support for an open data policy? I think public in this regard probably means your average citizen. Maybe I'll editorialize a little bit on this question. When it comes to data policy, for the policy, folks who work with this every day, this could be extremely interesting, but I think it's also fair to say that the average person probably doesn't know or care very much about data per se. It's usually impact, and the impacts that were summarized by the council member and the state senator indicated that the impacts could be huge: economic, cultural, efficiency, operations, really the quality of government services. But I think it may be hard for some folks to really understand that at this manufactured stage of the raw materials coming together. So so that being is my editorial context, is there really much importance at all for the public to support legislation like this?
I can jump in on this if I think there will always be communities. I'm probably one of the reasons that I was driven towards open data as an important policy is the strength of the innovation community in Baltimore City. and they have been, they live and work in my district, and really we're passionate about this issue. And I think in most communities there will be an advocacy group that will be the strong driver. We're actually looking at a different concept of creating kind of an open data liaison within state government, because a lot of members of the public may not be kind of immersed in the concept of open data and how to manipulate it, but if somebody can walk them through the process of answering their question with the tools that are publicly provided, I think that is the single best way to invest them in why this is valuable. Unfortunately, that sort of ombudsman concept doesn't really exist, and so we're trying to think through, when a PIA comes through and the data is already available, is there somebody we can point them to that can help them learn how to access it with the systems that are available?
Let me add to that. I think that the value is, I've been working on this for a couple of years. I don't think most people understand what open data is. Most residents, most constituents, they don't know, and that's not their interest level. But when you make it real, like having an application where you can find out when the next bus is going to arrive, that's about demonstrating the value of open data. So you do have to keep the focus on the applications. We did do town halls with the public to get them to help us prioritize open data, and there's a community of people who get involved and follow things closely. But the broad impact is around the services that you can provide, or the opportunities that you can create versus the concept itself of open data.
Right, right. Now that makes perfect sense. I mean, that's the responsibility of elected officials, I believe. And it sounds like one that also has a strong responsibility. I think you also mentioned before about a harmonization with the executive branch. That makes perfect sense. I mean, this is democracy in action. So I think I'll wrap up here. Just one more question that's come in, and I think I'll start to direct this towards Alisha. There was a comment made. I don't know who actually made this comment, but that counties and cities are being more, I think it was aggressive or innovative, or just doing more with open data policy than at the state or federal level. That was a statement that was made. The question is that true, more broadly? And if so, Alisha, why do you think that is?
Yeah, I think we hit on this a little bit earlier, and that's a great question, another one that certainly we hear all the time. But when it comes down to it, municipalities are often a lot more agile than state government, and certainly than the federal government, which has a lot of rulemaking that it has to go through for open data innovation. Even though there have been President Obama's executive orders related to open data, we've seen a lot of struggles, frankly, with trying to actually implement that through all the agencies and departments. But when you get down to the municipal level, you have people who are in a more centralized location, for one thing, and tend to live and work in that community. They really feel a buy-in to helping open data move forward, whether they work in the government and are actually implementing the policy, or they're community advocates who are trying to make sure that that policy moves forward and is implemented strongly. So I think that's why we've seen a lot of cities, counties, towns, villages across the country being the ones to adopt open data policies, have strong open data policy programs. I think we will start to see more states innovating around open data and certainly working with their municipalities around that. And I think the federal government is going to hopefully surprise us here soon to do a little bit more around open data innovation.
Excellent. And council member or Senator Ferguson, would you like to contribute to that question as well?
I would love to, Tons. I think that for me personally, the best example of policy has been from the federal level, and they continue to improve and enhance, and evolve what they're doing. But I kind of can't relate very well to how it gets implemented at the federal level, and I can really see how it works at the local level. So, I think the history shows that maybe it sort of started out more local and then went federal, and now it's kind of appearing all across the country again at the local and state level. But it's easier for me to understand the application, at the local level, often with, again, for example, a transit data feed allowing an app to pull the data and tell you when your bus is going to arrive. That is intuitive for me. So I think it's kind of a combination.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I think we've actually reached the conclusion of our time today. We've covered a lot of ground, literally all levels of government, and just about every type of government service that can be delivered. So thank you very much to all the participants. Any final words before we sign off?
Go forth.
I had to give at least an option. Oh, sorry?
I was going to say, go forth and restore democracy with open data.
I knew that with at least 2 elected officials, there's going to be something like that coming up. Thank you so very much. I'd like to once again thank our panelists, Alisha Green, the policy associate with the policy team at the Sunlight Foundation, Councilman Riemer, and Maryland State Senator Bill Ferguson. Thank you all for participating. For all the participants that had signed in after this webinar, you will receive an email with some opportunity to provide feedback and also a link to some of the articles and documentation that we provided at Socrata to support you with your policy efforts. My name is Ian Kalin with the Socrata team. Thank you all very much for your participation today.
Thank you, Ian.
Thanks, Ian.
You.